Guess who has 2 thumbs and 300 subscribers? This guy right here. How you doing? I'm pretty excited because this is a milestone for me. A little less than a year ago, I actually hit 100 subscribers. So I've more than doubled in less than a year. That's pretty exciting. Last week, I was telling my good buddy and fellow YouTuber Mike the Media Dragon all about it. And he's like, hey, you should do a 300 themed project. You know, like something from the movie. And I'm like, oh yeah, that's a good idea. But I didn't really know what to make. So he suggested a sword. I was a little bit apprehensive about it. I've seen a lot of other people make them as well. Like Bobby Duke made one not too long ago, and it turned out really well. And he's like, so? So what if anybody else made them? You haven't made one, right? No, I haven't. So today, I'm going to be just joshing around making a Spartan sword from the movie 300. Oh, wait! Also, since I just hit a personal milestone, and because I haven't done one for a while, I'm going to do a giveaway. But I'm not sure what yet. I'll probably figure something out by the end of the video. So, stay tuned. And don't skip ahead, because if you do, I'll know, and I'll remember. See you at the end! Just like every other custom prop that I've made, I'm making this sword out of wood. I'm using this piece of basswood that I had laying around. And the first thing that I did was narrow it a bit and put a nice straight edge on it so that I could rip the piece into the desired thickness that I was looking for. The table saw didn't quite cut through the entire piece, so I finished it off with the utility knife. To achieve the correct shape of the sword, for reference, I used a combination of stills from the movie and some pictures of collectible swords that were manufactured to be sold on eBay and Amazon. Now, I could have printed out a picture to use as a template, but I really just wanted to eyeball it and see what I could come up with. Once I got the rough shape of the sword all cut out on the bandsaw, I went to work on smoothing out all of the surfaces and edges on the belt sander. This was just to make sure that everything was uniform for when I started shaping the blade. Speaking of which, I drew a line down the center of the edge to act as a reference point, and then started shaping the blade by beveling it on the belt sander. One thing to note is that this piece of wood was about a ½ inch thick when I started, and throughout the shaping process, I tried to maintain that thickness down the center spine. This is both for strength and stability, and also aesthetic accuracy. It was a bit tricky to get consistent bevels over the entire blade, only because this thing has so many curves on it. But it's not looking half bad right now. Next up, I used another piece of basswood to make the little spiky trim pieces that go on the pommel. Again, I just shaped these out freehand by looking at some reference photos. Once the first one was drawn up, I cut it out on the bandsaw. The idea I had here was to use a piece of stock that is much thicker than the sword, so that I could cut out the middle section and then slide both of the trim pieces over the sword handle. Yeah, like that. Now to make the bottom one. And while I could have cut and carved both these trim pieces and the sword out of one solid board, I chose to go this route instead, and I ended up getting really good results. And here's both pieces on together. Next up, I had to shape both those trim pieces so that they weren't so blocky. Once I got the first trim piece shaped well enough, I made a small piece to go on the rear side of the hilt. I cut it out of a thin piece of stock, and then temporarily glued it onto the other trim piece. This was to ensure that while shaping it, I could get consistent curves. Once I got that cap piece shaped correctly, I removed it, set it aside, and repeated the same process again for the other trim piece. Once both of those trim pieces were complete, I started to shape the grip of the sword. I marked the correct placement of the 2 trim pieces on the grip before I started rounding it over. This was to ensure that I maintained a nice squared surface for glue up. I applied a fair amount of glue to the inside sockets of both of the trim pieces and then slid them onto the grip. I applied glue on the ends for the caps as well and then clamped them into place. It was a bit tricky to clamp these without the things wanting to slide around. and if I had to do it again, I probably would have applied a couple dots of crazy glue onto those caps beforehand. But it all worked out. Once the glue was dry, I used my rotary carver with the drum sander to further fine-tune the shaping of those pommel guards. This thing was starting to shape up pretty well. In order to give the sword an accurate-looking spine, I had to use the rotary carver with an assortment of different attachments. The first of which being the ball burr. This is only the second project that I've ever used this thing. It has a really coarse grit and it works very well for removing material. Next, I switched over to this grinding ball to further refine the channel that I cut with the ball burr. This also worked very well. Next, I switched back to that drum sander to further refine and shape the bevel of the blade edge. This took a bit of time and I had to do quite a few passes to achieve the correct look. But in the end, it worked quite well also. Once the front side of the blade was done, I repeated the same process on the rear. After the one side of the sword was complete, I flipped it over and started on the other side. And I'll give you a closer look at how well that ball burr works. The last time that I used this thing was on the salad slap and helping hands that I made last year. I made those out of a hard maple, and as I previously said, this sword is made of basswood. And holy crap, what a difference it was. Basswood is so much softer and easier to work with for this type of project. Once I got the spine all cut and shaped, I switched over to hand sanding. This took a long time. I edited and sped the footage up quite a bit, because if I didn't, this video would never end. Even having done that, as you can see, it still takes forever to sand. Yeesh. Glad that's over with. Oh wait, it's not. Even though it's steel wool and not sandpaper, it's still technically sanding. And I'm wearing gloves because if I didn't, then I would have all kinds of little tiny metal fibers stuck in my hands. And trust me, that sucks. I used a coarse pattern of steel wool initially, and then switched to a very fine steel wool, which leaves almost a polished surface. That stuff does a great job. There, now that's looking like a sword that's worthy of Spartans. For the paint, I used 2 coats of flat black primer with a light sanding with that very fine steel wool in between. And then I applied 2 coats of this hammered textured dark bronze spray paint. I was going to use a hammered silver spray paint, but I thought the dark bronze would give it a more accurate look. Speaking of looks, what a weirdo. For the grip, I decided to wrap it with leather. And to do that, I'm using this leftover scrap from a belt that I used on the leather strap for Mjolnir. I used the belt sander to shape and thin down the leather strap. This works quite well, but it's very messy. Next, it was time to wrap the grip. To do that, I applied glue to the one end of the strap and then carefully wrapped it around and applied glue to every other wrap. I initially planned on using 5-minute epoxy to secure the strap, but the crazy glue worked way better than I thought it would. Next up, it was time to color the leather grip, using shoe polish, of course. You all know how much I love shoe polish. And come to think of it, in this instance, I'm using it for the closest thing that it was made to be used for, which is kind of weird. I'm using a combination of some very fine grit sandpaper and some steel wool to scour the blade, and then applying black shoe polish over the entire thing. I left the shoe polish set and partially dry a bit, and removed the excess with a paper towel. Then I repeated the same process on the other side. For the trim pieces, I just polished on some powdered graphite to give them a gunmetal appearance. Nothing too fancy here, it just works really well. To add more weathering effects to the blade, I used this silver rub and buff. I concentrated mainly on the 2 honed edges of the blade, but I did add a bit here and there to the spine also. I repeated the same process on the other side of the sword as well, being careful to maintain consistency in the weathering. Now let's take a look at the sword all finished up. While it is by no means a perfect replica, I absolutely love how cool this thing looks. That hammered bronze spray paint really added a lot of depth and character to the blade. And I think the leather grip looks pretty awesome. The pommel guards turned out pretty cool as well. Now that I have this sword, I guess that means I'm gonna have to make a Spartan shield to go along with it as well, at some point. I'm pretty excited about how well this thing turned out. It's gonna look great on my wall. But what do you think? Let me know in the comments below. Now, it's giveaway time. Do you remember back at the beginning when I said that I didn't know what I was gonna give away? Well, I was just being facetious because I actually just made 2 of them. That's right, I made 2 swords, and I'm gonna give one of them away. If you're interested in winning one of these swords, here's what you gotta do. Leave a comment on this video telling me your favorite one of my projects or videos that I've made. And if this is the first one of my videos that you're seeing, then you've got a lot of fun homework to do. So think about it and let me know what your thoughts are. And of course, I'll extend this to my social media platforms as well, so you'll have multiple chances to win. Then, exactly 1 week after this video is posted, I'll gather the names of everyone who's commented, and I'll draw one name, and they'll be the lucky winner of this cool collectible. That's it for this one. Thank you as always for watching, and thanks for subscribing. If you like this video, please be sure to leave a like below, and share it with somebody. Anybody, doesn't matter who. And of course, leave a comment. And I'll see you next time.